Welcome to another deep dive. This time into a world most of us only see in movies, right? The world of a butler.
Hmm.
But this isn't just any butler. This is Stevens. And our source material is Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, The Remains of the Day.
Such a good book.
And what makes this even cooler is that
Yeah.
the whole story is told from his point of view. He's not just like the main character.
Right.
He's our narrator.
You're exactly right. And that's key, I think, because we're not just getting, like a plot summary.
Right.
We're inside Stevens' head. We're experiencing his thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
His very formal, proper thoughts
Yes.
as he drives in his Ford across England.
I love that detailed Ford.
It's the 1950s, and, he's reflecting back on his decades of
Yes.
service at Darlington Hall.
Arlington Hall. Think Downton Abbey.
Ooh, yeah.
But with this extra layer of like mystery.
Absolutely.
Because Darlington Hall wasn't just any country estate.
No.
It was hosting diplomats, politicians,
Nah.
whispers of these deals that like shaped history.
Backroom deals.
But now years later, Stevens is on this road trip.
Yeah.
And it's all because of a letter from Miss Kenton,
Ah, yes, Miss Kenton.
a former housekeeper.
And that letter hints at a different life, right?
Yes.
A life she could have had.
Hmm.
So we know right from the start, Stevens isn't heading towards some new destination.
Right.
He's driving towards some unresolved feelings.
It's so interesting because Stevens is like obsessed with being a great butler.
It's just
Not even competent.
right.
Great. And there's this story, right?
I know this story.
About a butler who finds a tiger
What?
under the dining table.
No. A tiger.
Yes.
During a dinner party.
Yeah, like a formal dinner.
Oh, my goodness.
And the butler, he doesn't even blink.
He doesn't.
Calmly informs his employer, suggests they use the shotguns, like carries on.
Oh.
And Stevens, he loves this story.
Right.
Right? It's not just about like staying calm under pressure. It's about embodying this ideal of service. And he contrasts himself with another butler, Mr. Graham,
Yes.
who thinks dignity is something you're born with.
Mm.
But Stevens,
Yes.
he believes you earn it through years of discipline.
What do you think about that?
It's like he's chosen to dedicate himself to something like bigger than himself, this idea of like the perfect butler, you know?
Right.
But it makes you wonder, is he choosing this because he truly believes in it, or is it something else?
Right.
Maybe he's insecure.
Mhm.
Maybe he's afraid to like show his true self.
I think you've hit on something really important there, and this becomes this question. I mean, it becomes even more important when we think about who Stevens dedicated his life to serving.
Yes, Lord Darlington.
Lord Darlington.
Yeah.
It turns out, this seemingly respectable lord, he was actually deeply involved in trying to appease Germany in the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
We're talking like hosting figures like Ribbentrop at Darlington Hall.
Okay, that's a red flag.
Right.
Like Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister, hanging out at your boss's estate.
Exactly.
Not a good look.
Not a good look.
But you mentioned, historical context earlier. So,
Appeasement. We have to remember, it wasn't some fringe idea back then.
Mhm.
This was like mainstream policy debated by, governments.
okay.
So while we might look back now and see Darlington's actions as, naive
Right.
or even dangerous,
Yeah.
it's crucial to remember that Stevens was living through these events, like, as they unfolded.
That's a good point. It's like, imagine being like a fly on the wall in those rooms, seeing these powerful people making decisions that could change the world.
Exactly.
So how does he reconcile his loyalty to Darlington with these like morally questionable dealings? Did he ever push back? Did he ever express concern?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's where Miss Kenton's letter becomes even more interesting. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Because it suggests she might have a different perspective. Maybe even challenge
right.
Darlington's choices.
Oh, wow.
So Stevens is driving towards this reunion with someone who could potentially like make him question everything he thought he knew.
Oh, that's juicy.
Yeah.
It's giving me like what if vibes. Like
Yeah.
what if Stevens had listened to Miss Kenton?
Right.
Could things have been different?
Totally. But before we get too deep into their relationship, there's this other encounter that I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
That really shows how out of touch Stevens might be with the world outside of Darlington Hall.
You're talking about the villagers.
Yes. the villagers who mistake him for a lord.
It's so funny, but also kind of sad.
It is.
They see his car, right?
His fancy car, yeah.
His clothes, and they just assume he must be some important figure.
Yeah.
They start asking him for his, like, lordly opinions on all sorts of things.
As if he's, some kind of authority.
And Stevens is just completely bewildered.
Of course.
Because he spent his whole life, like, blending into the background.
Right.
Never expressing his personal views.
It's like his years of, impeccable service have turned him into this blank slate, almost.
Right.
Unable to even form, like, his own opinions.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It is.
Because his employer, he was anything but neutral.
Right.
Darlington was actively shaping world events. And Stevens, he prided himself on being this silent observer.
You're right. It's like Stevens is this mirror reflecting the complexities of that time.
Wow, I hadn't thought of it like that.
That clash between, the old world values
right.
and this rapidly changing society.
Makes you wonder if Stevens is even capable of adapting.
Right.
Of evolving his understanding of duty and dignity beyond the walls of Darlington Hall.
To answer that,
yeah.
I think we need to delve into his relationship with Miss Kenton.
So Stevens finally arrives at Mrs. Ben's, Miss Kenton, right?
Right.
And it's not exactly like a Hallmark reunion.
Yeah.
There's this like undercurrent of sadness, you
Yeah.
know, like they're both carrying all this unspoken stuff, missed opportunities maybe.
It's like they're like dancing around something.
Yes.
Afraid to say what's really on their minds.
Totally.
And then, bam, Mrs. Ben just drops his truth bomb.
Yeah.
She almost left Darlington Hall
No way.
to marry another butler.
Hold on, wait. This changes everything. So there was something between them.
It seems like it, yeah.
Like a spark that could have, become something more.
Right, if things had been different.
If only.
But she chose to stay out of that same sense of duty, loyalty that we see in Stevens.
Right.
She felt obligated to Darlington Hall.
Yeah.
To her role there.
It's heartbreaking, He can't help but think about those sliding door moments. Like, what if they had both just been honest back then?
Yeah.
Her line, one can't be forever dwelling on what might have been.
Oh, I know.
It just gets you right in the feel.
Right, in the feels. And it really mirrors Stevens's own, I think, struggle with regret.
Yeah.
Even though he tries so hard to deny it.
He really does. He clings to this belief that he served Lord Darlington faithfully, no questions asked. But as his journey goes on, you start to see more and more cracks in that facade.
You do.
Yeah.
Especially when he starts to piece together what was really happening at Darlington Hall during those pre-war years.
Right, the whole appeasement thing with Ribbentrop.
Exactly.
And it turns out things were even shadier than Stevens realized.
Yeah, there's this scene where he overhears a conversation between an American guest, Mr. Lewis, and a French diplomat, M. Dupont.
Got it.
And Lewis is basically like implying that Darlington is a pawn in the Nazis' game.
Wow.
Totally out of touch with reality.
And this is all happening during this like high-stakes international conference at Darlington Hall, right? Yeah. Where Darlington is supposed to be like brokering some kind of peace agreement.
Right.
So the tension is high.
Oh, yeah.
And Stevens is stuck in the middle, serving drinks, trying to keep his cool while like witnessing this whole web of deceit.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Stevens is trapped.
He is.
Between his growing doubts about Lord Darlington.
Right.
And this unwavering commitment to his role as a butler.
It's like he's literally serving the people who are undermining the man he's given his life to.
Talk about a loyalty crisis. Makes you think, where do you draw the line?
Right.
When does blind loyalty become, complicity?
And all of this comes to a head during this dinner scene, and oh my gosh, it is explosive.
It is.
Mr. Lewis, maybe a little too much wine, goes on this rant.
Oh, yeah?
Calls out Lord Darlington, the other guests, as, like, naive dreamers.
And praises, remember this, he praises professionalism.
Oh, wow.
Above all else.
Which, knowing what we know about his attempts to sabotage Darlington, takes on a whole new meaning.
Totally.
Poor Stevens just trying to serve drinks as this, like, social bomb goes off.
Right.
You can practically picture him there, stiff upper lip, trying to fade into the background while his world is, like, imploding.
And just as things are, reaching this peak, Stevens gets news. His father,
Oh, no.
who also works at Darlington Hall as an under-butler,
Right.
has fallen seriously ill.
Talk about terrible timing.
Seriously. So Stevens is faced with this impossible choice.
Stay and do his duty, or go be with his dying father.
Exactly. And of course, he chooses duty.
Of course.
He rushes to see his father briefly, but then hurries back downstairs to, continue serving the guests.
Like nothing happened.
Like nothing happened.
It's such a powerful scene. You see the personal cost of his dedication.
Right.
He's prioritizing his role, even as his father is, on his deathbed.
And it's even more tragic because later on, we learn that Darlington's actions were as damaging as Mr. Lewis said.
Right.
Stevens dedicated his life to this man who was basically, contributing to the rise of fascism.
It's a gut punch. Stevens left grappling with the consequences of his blind loyalty.
And there's this moment, where he tries to justify it.
Yeah.
He says, I was just following orders. It wasn't my place to question.
Right.
He remembers a conversation with Darlington about dismissing Jewish staff.
Oh, wow.
And how Ms. Kitten at the time, she called it a sin.
You can practically see the gears turning in Stevens' head,
I know.
He's starting to see things differently.
He is.
But is it too late to change?
That's the question that lingers as Stevens drives on around.
Yeah.
How much responsibility do we have for the actions of the people we serve? Can loyalty be misguided?
Even dangerous.
And what happens when the foundation of our beliefs just crumbles?
So Stevens is driving back from this really emotional reunion with Mrs. Benn.
Right.
And you'd think, right, he'd be wrestling with all these revelations about Darlington, the choices he's made.
Yeah, all that.
But then there's this, twist.
Yeah.
Mrs. Benn says she's not actually leaving her husband.
Mm.
She explains, sometimes she gets lost in these what-if fantasies.
Right.
But she always ends up choosing to stay.
Wow.
It's like she's closing the door on that what-if,
Yeah.
The one Stevens has probably been thinking about his whole trip.
Right, his whole life, maybe?
And it just leaves him so, so lonely.
It does.
He's given his life to service, to Lord Darlington, and now he's facing, what's left?
The remains of his days.
With no real connection.
And to make things even more, thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Stevens has this encounter on the pier with another retired butler.
Okay.
This guy had a much simpler life,
Mm-hmm.
worked for a smaller household.
Right.
But he seems content, happy even.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
He talks about how much he enjoys his evenings now, now that he's retired.
Right.
He even says the evening's the best part of the day.
That's got to be mind-blowing for Stevens, right?
Totally.
This idea of enjoying free time, of finding fulfillment outside of, duty and service is totally foreign to him.
It is.
It makes you wonder, has Stevens actually lived a good life?
Mm.
Has he served the right things?
I think that's the question that hangs over the whole book.
It does.
As Stevens sits there on the pier watching the lights come on, you can almost see the wheels turning.
I know, right?
He's realizing maybe that he wasted his life.
On a man who didn't deserve his loyalty.
And that he missed out on real connection.
Because he put duty above everything else.
It's powerful stuff.
So what does it all mean for us, the listeners? I mean, we're not butlers.
Right.
We don't live in these grand estates.
But there's something universal about Stevens' story.
There is.
It reminds us that we all make choices,
We do.
We all dedicate ourselves to things.
Our careers, relationships.
Causes we believe in.
And sometimes we have to stop and ask, are we serving the right things?
Are we living a life that really reflects our values?
That brings us true happiness.
Right.
It's a book that really makes you think about your own life.
The choices we've made.
The paths not taken.
And it leaves you with this question. Is it ever too late to change?
To find meaning in the time we have left.
Those are questions worth thinking about.
They are.
And that's the beauty of the remains of the day,
Yeah.
It doesn't give you easy answers.
It doesn't.
It just gives you this human story.
It makes you think.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
And as for what Stevens does with the rest of his life,
right.
Well, I guess that's for each of us to decide.
I like that.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.